All right, so as I said before I prayed, you're going to see a few slides up on the screen. These are parts of the brain. So I promise it's not chemistry or biology or any type of class. I don't teach mostly, but you'll see I want you to know all the parts of the brain that are inside your skull and what they do, because they do a tremendous amount of things. And not only that, but they are generating signals from your brain to your body faster than you can even imagine. So fast, right? So you'll see the frontal lobe. So you'll see some of the things: speech, problem solving, planning, movement, your personality, emotions, sensations. You'll see the temporal lobe, which talks about processing sound and memories, facial recognition. And we're not talking about the newest iPhone. Your eyes recognizing other people. We're talking about the five senses: touch, temperature, pain, processing information when people speak to us. What we see, balance, posture, coordination, breathing, sneezing, coughing, swallowing, your heartbeat pumping, the blood pumping throughout your entire body, growth and production of future humans. Your brain also produces melatonin, which helps you sleep. It's a nice thing to do, sleep once in a while. Your skull and your cerebral fluid protects and nourishes your brain. It's not just this hard thing up there. It actually has a purpose. All of these things are working together continuously, all the time. It's amazing. The most amazing organ that we have. Probably the most underutilized organ that we have as well. Your brain needs very specific things. It needs nutrition-rich food. It needs sleep. It needs exercise. It needs the challenge of reading. It needs playing games and solving puzzles. It needs those things every day. Not just when you're with your kids, not just when you're with your spouse, not when you're just alone, all the time. It needs those things to be at its best. There's a couple of states of mind that I want to point out today that we can be in, and we're probably in most of the time. We're either in kind of a mindlessness state or a mindfulness state. The mindfulness state is described as intentionally focusing in the present moment and accepting what is in the moment without evaluating it as good or bad. In the moment, present, accepting, some key phrases there, and not evaluating it as good or bad. Or you can be in this mindlessness state, which is a state of unawareness, going through the motions without being consciously aware of your surroundings or your inner states. We need both of these states of mind, but I'm going to challenge you today, because are you in this mindlessness state more than you probably need to? And these things can happen all the time. We can easily get stuck into these two different mindsets, and we can get stuck into this mindlessness state. So are we mindfully focused throughout our day at very important times, especially when we're in our relationships? And I want you to spend today and this upcoming week really challenging yourself to consider observing and describing where you are. What's going on? What state of mind am I in right now? Can you actually observe it and describe where you are? You should be able to, but it does take some self-awareness and some time. It's like a radio station or TV that you're just trying, if you're a little bit more old school like I am, you're trying to turn the knob just enough to hear it clearly. That's what mindfulness is. You're trying to tune in. There's a lot of static going on in the world, and so are you tuned in to where you need to be in your mind? Today you're going to hear some things that you may already know or possibly have not heard before. Your challenge is to continue to tune in, to consider, focus your attention today on what we're talking about. And that's one of the reasons I had you write those things down at the beginning of our sermon today. And that's something you can do before any and all services here. When you're at work, writing these things down, kind of what we call like a brain dump sometimes, of just getting things out of our mind in order to be able to move forward with our day, to kind of reconnect with our Savior and our God. So the last few weeks, you've been through some sermons. We've talked about finances and worship. We've talked about health and wellness. We've talked about family. We've talked about purpose and identity last week with Sarah. And next week, we'll talk about community. All of these things, all of these areas in these sermons all go together to help create a mental health state that's going to be optimized for you to be able to be the best that you can possibly be for God. And we discussed these last few weeks this verse in Matthew 7:24 through 27. Everyone then, not just me or you, everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. Those two different stories are not the rain came for one person but not the other. It came for both. It was there. These challenges happen all the time. And this leads me to the theme for today. Foundations in our faith start with a mindful, habit-focused life directed toward God, not avoiding, but pursuing a life that is steadfast, prudent, and focused on His word, His mind, and moving with Him. I like to point those last three things out. His word, His mind, moving with Him. We're going to spend a few minutes going through and kind of doing a brief study on one of the books that I find one of the most books I find interesting, which is the book of Proverbs. There's a lot of really great wisdom in this book. And the first 12 verses of chapter 3, Proverbs 3, we're going to break down each of these verses in two parts. First verse, second verse. And what this has is this is what you should do, then this is what's going to happen. This, then. Okay? So think about those two parts to each of the verse. So we'll start with verses 1 and 2. My child. Man, I love hearing when God calls me His child. And you'll hear this again later on. My child. Never forget the things I have taught you. Store my commands in your heart. If you do this is the then. If you do this, you will live many years and your life will be satisfying. So, again, being a child of God, never forgetting what He has taught us. For most of us who've been in Sunday school, there's always been that we're gonna memorize a verse kind of thing, right? But then as we become adults, it's kind of optional, right? We're adults, we can make our own choices, right? Sunday school, still make a choice, but everyone's doing it, you might as well do it, right? So we're gonna spend a couple minutes talking about one verse, right? And what I'd like for you to do, again, this is a little bit of work on your standpoint. I want you to look at this verse, not just look at it and say it in your mind, write it down, put it in your phone, tell your neighbor, do something with this information. It'll help sink in deeper and longer into your brain. And these are important words, as Proverbs 3 said. So we're going to read Philippians 4, verse 6. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. I had to look up the word supplication. It's not a word we use on an everyday basis, not even in counseling. The action of asking or begging for something earnestly and humbly. Earnestly and humbly. Begging. We don't like to beg, but this is one of those moments we need to beg. Do not be anxious about anything. So take a few minutes. Again, write it down. Put it in your phone. Tell your neighbor. Do something with this information for just the next couple of minutes. All right? Again, I'm going to leave you in silence for a couple minutes. Don't be scared. I promise I'll come back. All right. Hopefully you've had a minute or a half, 2 minutes to just review that. Just taking the time. We need to pause and reflect on what God is telling us at times. This isn't a go verse, and maybe think about it later. This is in the moment right now. We need to be considering all the parts and pieces of what this is saying. Are we praying? Are we focused? Are we in thanksgiving to God all the time? So the next couple verses in Proverbs, so we're verses 3 and 4. Never let loyalty and kindness leave you. Tie them around your neck as a reminder. Write them deep within your heart. Then, there's a key word, then you will find favor with both God and people, and you will earn good reputation. You may or may not be surprised, but a significant number of struggles that counselors see frequently is helping clients with their relationships. I'm sure we have examples at times of someone else who did not show us loyalty and kindness. But how often do you show this to your friends, your family, your coworkers? Finding favor with God and people should be a priority. But we do get hurt, and boundaries need to be set at times. As we discussed earlier, it may be important to mindfully move forward in those relationships. I'm going to share just a few questions, like us good counselors like to do. We like to ask lots of questions. So when you think about these relationships, what has caused the relationship to be severed? Maybe this happened long, long time ago. Maybe this is something that you don't even remember what made it get severed. Is there an actual reason for it being severed? Has there been any attempts to make a repair for this relationship? Or maybe it's time to repair it again, to make another attempt. What past actions have you taken that may have led to the separation? How do you want to move forward in this relationship ultimately? What do you want to do? Is there a space for kindness in the broken space? Why or why not? Very few times do I hear clients come in and say, man, I was just super kind and loyal, and they just left. Really? That's surprising. Kind and loyal. And you loved them, and they left. I mean, it can happen, absolutely. But is there something there that needs to be worked on in your heart to get back to that point? All right, verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all you do, and he will show you which path to take. He is our GPS. He will show you the way long before Google ever arrived. This is an opportunity for him to show you the path to take. He is speaking today. He is. Some of these key words that I hear in this passage are trust and understanding. First and foremost, are you considering what it means to trust God? Are you seeking him with who are struggling with physical pain, for mental illness, for relationships, your thought life? When we rely on our own understanding, have you ever considered you may not be telling yourself the truth? Those voices that what you're saying in there may not actually be true. Your brain absolutely wants to believe whatever's in your mind, whatever you're thinking about. But it's not always true. I hate to tell you. Am I the first one to tell you? Your brain's not always telling you the truth. It isn't. So I have some questions. I'm sorry. It's old habit. They die hard. Lots of questions. So what does this thought and or belief say about me, others, or even the world? Consider, record. This means writing it down. Record, writing it down in your phone, in a notebook. Evidence that shows this thought or belief is not completely true 100% of the time. When was this thought or belief untrue? Write down examples. Again, it's not always true. Develop an alternative, balanced belief or thought. And that may require seeking out some people in your life to help you with that. That may be spending time with God in prayer, listening, which is that stuff we did earlier, that silent stuff. That happens. God speaks in silence. He speaks through people. He speaks through his word. He speaks in a lot of different ways. But we are kind of a little bit everywhere sometimes. And that's what it talks about. That's why I started the sermon with mindful. We have to be mindful of the moment that we're in and considering where we are and where we want to be. All right, verses 7 and 8. Don't be impressed with your own wisdom. Instead, fear the Lord and turn away from evil. Then you will have healing for your body and strength for your bones. Our minds and bodies are connected. They are one unit. I know literally they are, but they're also internally connected. All the things, right? So stomach aches, headaches, migraines, random pains. They're like, where did this pain come from? I'm like, I haven't played any sports. I haven't lifted weights. I haven't done anything of that sort for a while. Why do I have this pain? Why is my leg jumping all over the place, right? Starts up here, right? Starts up in your brain. Your body and your brain are connected. So are you spending time, number one, with God, but number two, with others? Are you working through these things? Because as it says in Psalm 46:1, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Present help. Not past tense, not future, present, right now. Mindfully, right now. All right, verses 9 and 10. Honor the Lord with your wealth and with the best part of everything you produce. Then you will fill your barns and with grain, and your vats will overflow with good wine. And just as we have, like I said at the beginning, we've talked about finances, right? Finances are a struggle for individuals, for families, for marriages. I see it, I hear it, it's a struggle, right? So are you bringing your finances and giving God your best, not just with your money resources, but also with your ability resources as well? We are the managers of what he owns. That's it, right? So are we managing what he's giving us? Now Solomon switches direction here in these last couple verses, 11 and 12. And he points more to a struggle within each of us, which is obedience. Those of us that were children at one point, remember our struggle for wanting things the way we want them, not the way that he wants them or our parents wanted them for us. Correction may not feel loving, but it needed to keep us on course. So in verse 11 and 12, my child, man, again, loved hearing that I'm his child. Beginning and the end, he just makes sure that we understand we are his children. Don't reject the Lord's discipline, and don't be upset when he corrects you. For the Lord corrects those he loves, just as a father corrects a child in whom he delights. He loves. He corrects those he loves. That's pretty fantastic. If you're not getting correction, I'm just saying, you might want to get some connection with God. I'm going to spend some time with him. Just like riding a bike, driving a car, flying an airplane, there needs to be constant adjustments in direction. We need to keep making small daily changes to ensure we are following God's path for us. You are unique, and you're the only one on the mission that you are on. You're on a solo mission with him. But change happens slowly and deliberately, just as it states in the Old Testament book of Habakkuk. Habakkuk 2, 3, and 4. The vision is for a future time. It describes the end, and it will be fulfilled. If it seems slow in coming, wait patiently, for it will surely take place. It will not be delayed. Look at the proud. They trust in themselves, and their lives are crooked. But the righteous will live by their faithfulness to God. Wait patiently. Right in the middle there. Whew, that's hard to wait. And patiently, right? But he's calling us to it because it will surely happen. It will surely take place, as it says there in verse 3. Last year, we had a series on habits at the beginning of the year. And I recommend going back and listening to the series. It is a really good series on just developing habits. But there's a book that specifically I've gone through fairly recently is Atomic Habits by James Clear. And he talks about a couple of things. Number one is environment is the invisible hand that shapes human behavior. There are different examples of this in the book, but the one that stood out to me is the concept of impulse buying in a store or online. We tend to see a product and we begin visualizing a need for it, even if there was no need for it. So it's that environment, invisible hand that shapes our human behavior. He also writes, many of the actions we take each day are shaped not by the purposeful drive and choice, but by the most obvious option. Most obvious option. How do we consider what is the most obvious option? The most obvious option comes from our five senses. And you saw where that comes from in our brain. But primarily, it's what we see. Approximately 10 million of the 11 million sensory receptors within our bodies are in your eyes. 10 million receptors in your eyes. This leads me to consider all the verses throughout the Bible that talks about sight, and especially one in Luke 18 that you'll see up here. Here's a few examples up on the screen. But in Luke 18, Jesus meets with a man. What do you want me to do for you? This man says. Lord, let me recover my sight. And Jesus said to him, recover your sight. Your faith has made you well. And immediately he recovered his sight and followed him, glorifying God. And all the people, when they saw this, gave praise to God. All the people gave praise to God. He was following him. He restored his sight. Amazing. I have a personal story on sight also. In 2019, I had a stroke and lost some of my vision in both of my eyes. Same spot, both eyes. Strange phenomenon. There's things I can't see. But what he did is he opened my eyes to my other senses on a regular basis. It's amazing. Again, he didn't just give us one sense, right? He gave us multiple senses to help us in our life, in our daily walk. It's difficult to see sometimes cars passing by or things on the floor when I'm not intentionally looking. I miss things right in front of me sometimes. But it also allowed me to be grateful and appreciative for the many parts God allowed for me to keep and restore. So I ask a question, another one, sorry, it's just kind of part of the game here. How are you making God the most obvious option in your life? How do you do that? How are you doing it? It's easy to make phones and shopping and family time and hobbies and relaxing of all things the most obvious thing. But what can we do today in this time to make God the most obvious option in your day? I have just a few suggestions up there that'll be up there on the screen, but can you set reminders on your phone to consider when to pray, when to read, when to follow up with somebody in your life? Are you setting out the Bible next to your bed instead of your phone? Obvious, right there, right next to your bed. What about trying a Bible study? There's been Bible studies mentioned on our screens with a friend, individually, with a coworker, here at church. How about listening to the Bible or the sermons at lunch while you're eating your lunch? Again, penetrating your mind and your heart. Switching from your current obvious options towards God will take time and effort, but as I mentioned earlier, it is less about the motivation to change and more about allowing Him to be right in front of you every day, every moment of every day. I'm going to circle back around to the beginning of our service, and we talked about those three things, right? How are you feeling about those three things you wrote down earlier? Where are you at with those three things? What is the next step of these three things? Is there a next step to work on? Or do you need to spend more time in prayer? What did you take away from Proverbs 3 today that can help you with these three or make other changes in your life? We're going to go back to Sunday school real quick. So again, Philippians 4, verse 6. Did you memorize it? Do you have it? Is it locked in? Do you need to tell somebody else about it later on today? Need to practice it? Do you need to put it in there, in deep, right? This is not just thinking it. Because sometimes what we think struggles. We struggle with it, right? Do not be anxious about anything, but with everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. I want to finish with a quote that I found in a devotion not too long ago from Joyce Myers. Your job is not to figure out when, but to make up your mind that you won't give up until you cross the finish line and are living in the radical, outrageous blessings of God. They are radical, but they're also outrageous. They truly are. If you're not living in those, you can. Absolutely today. Challenge yourself. Use your brain for what God created it to be. Let's close in prayer.